Jay's Custom Creations is sponsored by Bits and Bits. Use the code JBates to save 10% off your next router bit or CNC bit purchase at bitsbits.com. All right, this is Tool Talk, whatever number it is. The whole point of this Tool Talk series is to create a destination to point people towards for the commonly asked questions that I get about my tools. I'm not a tool salesman. I've got nothing to gain or lose whether you do or do not buy this particular tool. No affiliate links or any of that type of thing with this video. But as a consumer myself, it's very valuable to have some information out there that you can absorb and learn from before you make a big decision of buying a decent investment into a tool, right? Making a decent investment into a tool. This is the Hammer HS950. HS, I guess, means horizontal sander. So there's that. I'm just going to run through a couple specifics before I get to answering the common questions. So the belt size is 2,515 millimeters by 150 millimeters, or 99 inches by 6 inches. And the motor is a 3 horsepower motor. The belt is oscillating, so the belt goes up and down by about a half an inch or so. The table is lifting. The table actually lifts up and down, so you can access the fresh paper up above without having to flip the belt upside down. One thing to note with these belts, some of the belts that I have a directional arrow on them saying they must be spun in this particular direction. And I don't know why some do and some don't. Maybe somebody can chime in on that, because my thinking is if the bottom half gets wore out, well, you just flip the belt upside down, and then there you go. You got the other half, but then you're spinning in the opposite direction. So maybe that matters on some belts, maybe it doesn't. Just a random thought. Table lifts. The belt rotates 90 degrees for flattening. So I'll show you a little bit closer in just a second, but let's not knock anything over. There's a lever back here, and the belt, yeah, let's not knock anything over. Why do I do that every single time? The belt the whole top assembly goes to horizontal. Let me gather my thoughts here because I'm an idiot. Exposed drum on one end for radius sanding right here. This is a 4.5 inch diameter, so you have a 2 1/8 of an inch. Did I say 4.5? I think it's 4 1/4. I guess I can find out real quick. 4 1/4. Yeah, it's a 4 1/4 inch drum. So then that means you have a 2 1/8 radius on the sanding. Material stop right over here, which is similar to like a pin on a router table, a starting pin. So you can enter the tool without it throwing it to the side like you would in a router table. The miter fence attachment over there, and dust collection is adequate. So there's the quick overview. But let me bring you in closer and we'll talk about a few things individually and not throw this all over the shop like I just did. The belt does oscillate up and down, like I said, and it achieves that motion by the whole motor assembly moving up and down. It's not just the belt that moves. So if I turn this on for just a second, you can see the movement. This does have a pretty fast startup and slow down cycle. I didn't speed that up at all. That was real time. So I do like that. You can get rid of the oscillation, although I don't know why anybody would. I'm sure there's a reason why there's certain situations where you wouldn't want that oscillation, maybe. So someone chime in if you do know that. But you can get rid of that oscillation by loosening this knob, and then this handle will come towards me right there. Whole motor drops, no longer have oscillation, then you can lock it into place. I don't know why that is a feature. I think having it oscillate at all times would be better, but then again, I don't design sanders or tools for a living. The majority of tasks are going to be done on the bottom side of the belt, right? So you put the table all the way down and you're just using the edge sander as a sander. You're not really thinking about maximizing the surface area on the belt. So what happens is the bottom side of the belt gets wore out way faster than the top. And one way that you can utilize the top is with this table elevation. So you unlock it here and just roll it up with this wheel. And as you can see, that board was at the halfway point just a second ago. Now it touches the top of the paper. So the oscillation helps distribute the wear, and then the table elevation also helps distribute the wear. And this little locking knob locks it very securely at all elevations. All right, nothing is in the way to get knocked down this time. Rotating the table, this is the locking handle, locking knob, and then there's actually a handle on the motor assembly right here that you can grab a hold of to help rotate this. So you loosen this knob right here, and then it rotates, and there is a pointer right here with different angles. So 5 degrees, 10, 15, you can dial in a certain angle if you want, or just lift it all the way up, and the machine is now in horizontal sanding mode. When I first started researching these horizontal belt sanders, or floor standing belt sanders, I thought the ability to lay this flat or rotate 90 degrees was really cool because it allows more functionality of the tool, obviously. But in practice, there's really only one scenario that it really shines in this horizontal orientation that I found with my personal workflow, and that is for rough sanding panels right out of the clamps, specifically end grain cutting boards. So I do a lot of these end grain cutting boards just randomly and don't record them because, you know, and cutting board's a cutting board. We've done 1 or 600, they're all the same. So right out of the clamps, this is kind of rough, and I've got 2 options to clean it up fast, and that is to use my normal handheld belt sander, which has atrocious dust collection, or use this one, which has pretty good dust collection considering what it is, I would say. And I always choose this for this particular application. So in the vertical orientation, the table limits how much of the belt you can use because obviously the table's in the way. And in the horizontal orientation, you can pass this all the way around and contact the entire surface of the belt on the panel. And it makes very, very fast work of cleaning this up. And if you're consistent with your approach over the belt, you're not going to get any undulations or craziness. You have to be consistent with it. Of course, if you just let it sit in one spot, it's going to dig a ditch. That's for sure. This thing removes so much material so fast, assuming that the belt's not all clogged up. Just like with all other woodworking machines that change angles, there are stops located on both sides of the travel. And in this case, I have yet to adjust anything. It's been spot on from the factory. Here's the back side of the sander. Underneath the table, underneath the belt is just a big open space. This is kind of just a stamped steel or bent steel cabinet, nothing crazy. This isn't the cast iron base is what I'm trying to say. Open space. This bag right here, if I'm not mistaken, I think it came with this. Either way, it's a good handy way to keep track of all the nuts and bolts and tools and stuff that come with machines. So there's like 4 or 5 different Allen wrenches here for different adjustments on the machine. And I think that it came in this bag with it. Regardless, throw a magnet on the inside of it and store it somewhere right there, and you'll never lose the wrenches that came with the actual machine. These 2 knobs right here are for helping change out the belt, which I'll show you next. Changing out the belt is really easy to do. You need to make sure that there's no dust collection hose because this is coming off. These 2 knobs are the only thing you have to loosen up right here. And then you lift the whole back side of the shroud out and out of the way, off and out of the way. I'm just going to set this right in front. This lever right here pulls this drum this way to relieve the tension. And there's a little lock right there so you can take your belt off very quickly. Grab your new belt, put the new belt in place, and then get it where you want to on this side and pinch the extra over here. When you let this go, it takes up the slack and you're good to go. Now, putting the shroud back in place, there's these 2 bolts that it rides on, right? That's obvious. But right here and right here are 2 screws that have a little bit of gap between the head of the screw and then this piece right here. And on the inside face, I'm going to flip this upside down so you can see it. On the inside face of this piece, you see this small notch, they go over these 2 screws, and then up here is the big notch, they go over those. So this comes back into place, and this is like just not thin steel because it's not flexing, but it's not heavy by any means. It's not crazy, crazy heavy. So this goes into place like so. Kind of line up all 4 of these at the same time, staying outside of those, inside of these. That sets in place. You lock it down, and changing out a belt is that easy. It's incredibly easy to change out the belt, which is good because if it's not convenient, you're less likely to do it. This is very easy to do, and I have my belts right over, you can't see it, dang it, Right over to my left right there, probably one more arm's length away, is my belts. So you make them convenient to switch, and you won't be tempted to just let it ride with just a little bit more. I'll get a little bit more use out of this belt. Then you end up burning your material because you're building up too much heat. You know the story. I'll show you once again from this angle so you can see just how easy it is to do. You don't even have to be able to see these back here. Loosen those two. Lift this off. Set this down wherever you want to set it down. Loosen up your blade tension or belt tension. Remove the belt. Grab a new belt. Put a new belt on. Pinch the movable side over here, making sure you're somewhat lined up with your dust marks from the last time you used it. There you go. Good to go. Set this in place, making sure that the big knobs engage on the back side and the little keeper bolts engage on the operator side. Tighten this down, and boom, good to go. For that reason, I would recommend having the dust collection port be some type of quick connect, because it has to be off for this to be conveniently removed. Regarding dust collection, I have a couple different adapters that I cobbled together here. This is the factory port, and it's a European machine, so it's a metric size, which the majority of stuff here in the United States doesn't fit right off the bat. However, this Dust Right PVC pipe to Schedule 40 adapter fits perfectly over the factory port. So I have that, and from here I can attach just a regular dust collection hose to it. However, I like to make things difficult and also convenient at the same time. So I have another adapter so that I can use my Rockler Dust Right hose connection stuff. One of the tools in this island has to have this adapter just because I don't have enough drops to connect everything. So one tool I have to switch back and forth, and it's this one and the router table. So this goes right here, and I'm ready to go. And I need to use the router table, I can borrow this, but it requires both of these adapters. This miter gauge does not come with the machine, but in my opinion, it's borderline a necessity. It is so incredibly handy once dialed in. So this is not a typical miter gauge that you'd see on your table saw, miter saw, or router table. This has no movement. It's a fixed miter gauge, and the way that it's fixed is with this knob right here. So this piece, the runner inside the track, is a T. This is actually a T slot and a T bar. So what you're doing is you're essentially pinching this together, sandwiching on those T, on the little wings, I guess you could say, on the tabletop. And that's what really locks it into place. So this knob right here locks it into place. This knob is your indexing pointer. Very similar to the way I think the Incro system works and several of those other precision miter gauges. This opens up. If I loosen this up all the way, it can move. This opens up, and then you can find a common angle. You don't necessarily have to have a common angle. You can find out whatever angle you want and lock it down with this. But let's just say 45 degrees. Well, there's a notch for that. You make sure that this pin is properly seated in these notches, lock it into place, and you're on a common number, 45 degrees. But how do you know that that's accurate? Well, you calibrate it back at 0. So let's get back to 0. Make sure this is in its slot all the way, or its little notch. We'll lock down this pointer, and then we'll lock this down. So now this part is at dead nuts 90 degrees, or 0 degrees rather. So how do you make sure that this is? Well, you calibrate it with these screws. You make a little bit of a test cut, or sanding, put a square on it, and determine if you need to move this way or that way. And you make those tiny adjustments with these 4 screws here. You loosen up the locks, which are these 2 pieces. You make your adjustments with these bolts, which push on the rail, moving it one way or the other, and then you lock it back into place, make your test cuts, and you do that a couple times to just dial it in. Once it's dialed in, I mean, it's accurate. It's pretty darn cool. Now, of course, you may want to test the accuracy after you adjust and change the elevation if you mess with the table. However, everything that I've done with this machine, it hasn't changed the angle. I've raised the table up, raised the table down, well, put the table back down, and that, in my experience, hasn't changed the calibration on this. It still works as it's supposed to be. It's still calibrated to my standards as far as using a precision square to check everything. Once this is perfectly dialed in, this just basically becomes a powered shooting board, which is incredibly valuable for squaring things up fast and quickly. Not only for boards, you know, some that are much wider than this, but also for boxes. You can square up boxes very, very fast and clean up all the sides all the way around it. So you're sanding and squaring all at the same time. Really, really cool. And that's one of the most common tasks that I use on this, or one of the most common tasks that I complete on this machine. Also, this kind of acts like a starting pin on a router table. So it stops you from the material from being thrown away from you as you present it into the sandpaper. So if it has something to rest up against, it's not going to be thrown away from you, obviously, because this is essentially a stop block. But you don't necessarily need this to act as a stop block or a starting pin, because the machine comes with one right here. I never use this because I have this. If I didn't have this, I'd use the one that came with the machine. Let me show you where it's installed right over, right here. I can't see it. On top of the machine over here is an indexing pinhole and a threaded hole. The indexing pinhole accepts this particular pin on the stop. This is the stop that comes with the machine, the material stop. So the pin goes in place, still has some wiggle room. To lock it in place, you put a bolt in that threaded hole. Now, this came with a nice fancy bolt that's supposed to go with the machine, obviously, but my shop ate it. So what I do is I normally just make a new knob for everything that my shop eats, because it's apparently really hungry over the years. This is a carriage bolt, nothing fancy at all, and I just drilled a hole in a piece of wood, rounded over the edges to make it a little bit easier on the hands, and mashed it all the way through with some CA glue down into the bottom of that. So that creates a very fast and easy knob. You know, when I first got into woodworking, I thought making my own star knobs, well, that was really cool. I could make star knobs. However, the more I do woodworking, the less I like the idea of a star knob. It's just not as ergonomically friendly, in my opinion, than what I'm calling like a prop blade or a propeller blade type of a knob. Just get a rectangle, round over the edges so it's not hurting you a little bit. And this, in my opinion, is way better than a star knob. So I don't think I'm ever going to make any more star knobs. That's a fact for a different day or whatever, topic for another day. But this is my lock because my shop ate the bolt. So now, with this locked in place, I do have the same concept of a starting pin on a router table. You can enter, or you can put your material up against this and then enter the sandpaper so it doesn't get thrown out away from you. Let me back up and I'll show you a very handy use for this particular stop. With this stop block right here, a good example of where this material stop would be very handy is getting a nice consistent edge on the side of like a cabinet door. So if you just enter the sandpaper like this without a stop, you're more likely to have the front edge where the paper is coming from dig in quite a bit before you can recover and straighten it out. So it's difficult to get this to be nice and smooth freehand, because you're going to be moving, and if you're moving this way, you might be pushing this side in, and if you're trying to compensate for that, you're going to be pushing this side in. So hopefully that makes sense. With this stop over here, you can enter the material with that already up against that, and now all you have to do is focus on it being straight. So you're not really too concerned about it flying away from you. You just nice straight pressure. That's where this thing shines. However, because I use that miter gauge right here all the time, I almost never have this installed because, well, let me just change the camera angle a little bit. Because I use the miter gauge primarily, this is kind of redundant and not needed. And if I just leave it in place, it's not bothering anybody, but it is bothering the dust collection, or affecting the dust collection, because as dust comes off of the belt, it's going to smack into this and disperse out, more likely to not get sucked up in the airflow. So take this, I take this off all the time, leave it off all the time, I should say. And now I have all of the dust collection area right here, this shroud, fully wide open for all the dust to go in here. Now this is pretty cool too. It flips up all over here, so you can do some pass-through type of stuff. Let me zoom you out and it'll make more sense. Let's just pretend that this cutting board is 60 inches long. It's at that point, it's not a cutting board, but let's just say it's 60 inches long. Well, from this point right here where the backing of this belt starts to right over here where it ends is about 38 inches. So if you want to sand something that's really long, this stop gets in the way, so you remove it. Well, this dust collection shroud, you unlock, you flip it up, and now there's nothing obstructing the entire length of the machine. So this 60-inch long board, you can, if you want, enter the material to where it's, let's just say that board sticks all the way out to here. So you can start sanding this side and then pull it through, probably the other direction due to the way the belt travels from camera left to camera right. Probably want to start over here. But regardless, you can sand something much longer than the available space on the belt with this pass-through feature of all of the stuff getting out of your way. Dust collection on this machine is pretty good. I'm not going to say it's flawless by any means, but then again, you have to take into consideration what this is. This machine is a powered machine whose sole purpose is to create a ridiculous amount of dust fast, remove material. So of course it's going to make a mess. How well does it contain that mess? I would say it's pretty adequate. So for the majority of tasks that I'm just doing one or two little bits of sanding, I'll leave this down just by itself and just leave one 4-inch port on the back of here and call it good enough. And for the most part that is, because I do have an air cleaner cart in my shop, and I do have air filtration on all 3 of the mini splits here in the shop, so there's filtered air constantly. I'm not too concerned about it, especially considering what it is. Now, if I know I'm going to be here for a while, I'll take the time to put this this big gulp, I think is what it's called. It's just a big shroud that has a 4-inch port on the back. I very beautifully, I mean, that's a work of art right there, put some screws into this, into a piece of ash, and then stuck that ash into the base of like a Rockler flip top roller stand. So that's what this is a roller stand holding this up. And I put it up right close to this port, and I add another 4-inch hose to the back of this. So at this point, I'm running 2 4-inch hoses, and I only do that if I'm going to be here for a while. The reason I don't leave this here is because I'm standing right where another tool goes that I had to move to shoot this video. So this isn't the most convenient thing to leave in place, but I do put it in place if I know I'm going to make a huge mess. The only downside of this miter gauge is where to put it when it's not in use. I would love for this machine to have some type of integrated storage solution that came with the machine. Maybe it does, I just don't know about it. But I don't like setting something like this off on the shelf or on a table somewhere because it's more prone to be knocked down. I like everything to have a home. So what I did is I took a piece of 2x4, cut a dado on the back side, and I just screwed it right into the cabinet. And this allows me to store the miter gauge like that. It's out of the way. It's not the most pretty solution in the world, but it works. Now that we're familiar with the machine, you know what it does, let's answer some of the most commonly asked questions that I get about the machine, starting with the most common question, which is, why did you go with the Hammer brand and not another brand? I'm not married to any brand. I'm not a tool salesman. As a matter of fact, I've got 6 different brands of stationary power tools. If you want to buy one of the brands because you've seen it in my shop, cool. If you don't want to buy one of the brands after seeing it in my shop, cool. I'm not a tool salesman. I've got nothing to gain or lose whether you do it or not buy it. So throwing that out there. But just like when I did the comparison between the Hammer A341 16-inch jointer planer combo machine versus comparable machines from both Grizzly and Powermatic, by itself, if you just look at that machine, you think, wow, that's really expensive. But when you compare it to other brands with the same capabilities, and that's what we're really after, the capability of the machine. What can the machine actually do? The Hammer A341 jointer planer combo machine was a tremendous value when I made that video. I have no idea how much it costs or the competitive cost right now for those. Going back to this one, it's a very similar situation. Let's compare this machine, the Hammer HS950, to Grizzly's offerings, okay? So you have to make an apples to apples comparison. This is a 6x99-inch belt. What does Grizzly have in that range? They don't have a 99-inch belt. They have an 89-inch and a 108-inch. So I went on to Grizzly's website, put those two as requirements for the filters, and sorted them by lowest price. And the lowest price I could find, which was the 89-inch, I believe it was the 89-inch, was $2,095. So this one, which is the 99-inch from Hammer, is $2,099. So price, they're basically the same. But this belt is a little bit longer at 99 inches versus 89 inches on the Grizzly. This motor on this machine is a 3 horsepower motor versus the one on the Grizzly was a 2 horsepower. The working table right here for your material support is 33 inches long The width is just basically the same, so I'll disregard that. This is 33 5/8 of an inch long, and on the Grizzly, it is 26 7/8. So from those three main stats right there, I didn't really dig any deeper than that. Where do you get your sanding belts from? My last order of sanding belts, and I looked this up, was January of 2020, and I got quite a few belts, just because the more you get, the more you save on shipping, for the most part. So I'll try and buy in bulk if I know it's something that I'm going to keep around for a while. And I have not had to order since then, even though I use this thing all the time. So I got them from customsandingbelts.com, which is a website that no longer exists. I don't know if they went under due to the COVID and the whole, what am I looking for? Material shortage and supply shortage due to the whole COVID thing. I don't know what happened, but customsandingbelts.com is no longer a thing. So if you have a source for sanding belts, let us know. Put it in the comments where you can get inexpensive quality sanding belts. I'd love to know. What grits do I typically use on here? I have a bunch of grits. When I first got this, I kind of went up through the grits, got all these grits like you would, hand sanding with an orbital sander. But I typically only use 80 or 100 on here. Anything more seems to burn very easily with wood. So I also have, there's a little asterisk here, I also have one sanding belt that is 800 grit, and I use it for metal. So the 800 grit is really useful for establishing a primary bevel on plane blades, on chisels, regrinding down stuff that's horribly damaged and chipped as far as sharp edges. I sharpen my axes on here, my axes and hatchets. My lawnmower blades, I quit using an angle grinder on the lawnmower blades. I can just use them on this. This is so much more useful than just woodworking stuff. My traditional wood turning tools, I can put them up like this and kind of like a roughing gouge. You can do it freehand right here off that 800 grit belt. And it's pretty fast, and I really, really like it for that. So I would recommend, if you get something like this, probably stock up on the low grits and get one really high grit for shaping metal. It's super handy. Somebody said, is that 80-20 that's used on the fence of the miter gauge here? No, it's not 80-20. I think I mentioned it earlier. It's 40 by 40 extruded aluminum. It came with the miter gauge, so I imagine you can use all kinds of other attachments and whatever with it, although I'm not sure that any other attachments are necessary. Somebody said, more of a suggestion than a question, a sled that sits in the miter gauge, in the miter slot, and is at 5 degrees is how I put a 5-degree back bevel on cabinet doors. No worry of chip out and at the corners, and can build doors a little bit, then size them perfectly to the opening. Should try it out. That's a very cool idea. And rather than building a sled with this one, I can actually just tilt the table tilt the paper by 5 degrees, the whole head assembly by 5 degrees. I'm going to give that a try. I would love a good sander breakdown, disc versus belt versus drum. What's worth investing in and in what order? That's kind of, I'm going to say that that's a loaded question because I think it would be personal preference. I have never in my life had a disc sander. And the reason being is I've heard of a lot of people burning the paper too fast. It's a pain in the butt to replace, that type of thing. If you get the self-adhesive sticky back sandpaper, it's a circle, so it has to be cut that way. It's not the most inexpensive paper to begin with. Also, when you think of a rotating disc, the center is moving the slowest and the outside is moving the fastest. So you're going to get different performances on sanding the outside versus the inside. So based upon other people's feedback online, I've never pursued a disc sander. I do have a drum sander, the Supermax 1632, and I have this sander. If you're doing a lot of wide faces, this is not the machine for it. You're going to get a better, you're going to be more suited with a drum sander where you can pass the panels through it. If you want to do edges, a drum sander is not the option for you. You need something like this that you can do the edge or the narrow face of material. So you kind of can't say one's better than the other. They're two different beasts. They're both sanders, but they're two different beasts. I would recommend you look really looking into your workflow and find out which one would benefit you more if you're interested in them. I use this Way, way more than my drum sander. I can't even tell you the last time I used that drum sander, probably a year and a half, 2 years ago. I thought that was cheese on top of the sander. Oh, I forgot about this. Several people have asked questions about this thing right here. This is a block of what feels like rubber, like the soles of your shoes. It feels like a big eraser. You can get these anywhere. They're overpriced when you buy them from different companies that sell power tools and such. Harbor Freight is where you get these. Super cheap. They're basically all the same thing. You leave the plastic on, and while the machine's running, you stick it into the belt, and it just cleans the belt. It declogs the belt. Some people have used old shoes and whatnot, the soles of your shoes. This is super cheap. I forget how much these are. They're relatively inexpensive, and I think this one was this long when I bought it a couple years ago, and I use it all the time. They just last forever. This thing doesn't take much effort, doesn't take much to pressure to push on it to clean the belt. They last a long time. So no, it's not cheese, although I wish it was because I love cheese. A few questions. Is it worth getting the miter gauge? I'm not in the business of spending your money, so if you found what the information I provided useful, then you would say, yeah, it's worth it. If I had to, if my shop was blown away by a tornado, please don't happen, and I had to replace this machine, I would get the miter gauge again. Absolutely, without question. It's phenomenal. Like I said, it turns this into like a powered shooting board, whether it's just a small panel or a box. It is so ridiculously handy to be able to sand stuff square because you're squaring and you're sanding at the same time. It's just fast efficiency. And while I'm on the topic of that, that's the task that I use this probably the most. I use it all the time, but this is one of those tools that probably has the highest ratio of frequency of use to least amount of visible airtime on my channel, on my content, because I use this all the time to just bump up a couple pieces to sand them and square it up. But you don't need to show that every single time because it's just basic little stuff. I will show it if I've got a drawer or a box or something that I'm squaring all the way around. But the very common stuff, I don't show it because, like I said, it's just so basic. How's the dust collection? And I already talked about the dust collection. It's pretty good. The table height sturdy? Yeah, the table is pretty darn sturdy. A very common question, again, going back to cost. I've looked at the edge sander, but I have to wonder if it's worth the hammer prices for a tool. And by hammer prices, I'm imagining you're saying that they're kind of more expensive comparing to other things, but I haven't quite found that to be the case in a lot of scenarios. If you compare if you do make the apples to apples comparison, this brand isn't really that crazy expensive. Curious as your thought. Yeah. So yeah, I don't think it's a ridiculously high priced brand. How does sanding on this do for leaving scratches that need to be worked out when you still go to the random orbit sander? On drum sander, I find I need to redo the sanding at the same grit as the drum, but for less time. Same with an edge sander, pretty much. I mean, this is still a belt sander that I'm using 80 to 100 grit on. I will use it to square stuff up and get the initial sanding, but for the most part, you're sanding with the grain with this particular orientation. So the cleanup process on other machines or other tools, like if you use a random orbit sand or if you want to do the rest of it by hand, isn't that much because the scratch pattern is the same direction as the grain, so it's not nearly as noticeable. Now that is also true with a drum sander, but on a drum sander, it's more easy to get a little bit off angle on the grain because you have to feed it in to the drum sander. And if you don't feed it in perfectly perpendicular to the rotation, then your scratch pattern is going to be on a slight angle, which is much more noticeable than something like this where you're referencing off of a flat surface that is machined in line with the belt. Does that make sense? This is going to be perfectly lined up with the grain so long as your material has that grain, I guess, parallel with the edge, which is the majority of all boards that we're going to be working with. This is not a question, once again, but more of a comment that happens all the time. And it says, I bought a used jet edge sander just a month or so ago, and I cannot believe I did without it for so long. An edge sander like this is crazy convenient for so many different things. I read a lot of forum posts, old forum posts from people, and there was like kind of like this reoccurring theme that they would say, if I had to sell off all of my tools for whatever reason, I just had to start selling tools, the edge sander would be the last one to go out of my shop. And I thought, the edge sander? Really? You'd sell your table saw before an edge sander? That sounds kind of odd. But now that I have it, I'm like, well, it's just crazy versatile. It is really, really versatile, not just with woodworking, but like I said, I shape metal on here. I'll shape plane blades and whatnot to reestablish a primary bevel. My axes, lawnmower blades, all kinds of stuff. So it's not just woodworking. I don't know if that's enough of a selling point for you to invest in an edge sander. And I'm not in the business of you spending your money. So we all view things differently. But for me, I would agree with that knowledge that I've read on those forum posts is it's so handy and versatile, the concept of this particular style of machine, that I would kind of agree with them. It'd probably be one of the last machines to go if I was in for whatever situation I had to start selling off tools. Again, another comment about how handy they are. Edge sanders make all the difference. Most used tool in the shop. What made you choose this one over the others? Well, I've already talked about that. But yeah, most used tool. I wouldn't say it's the most used in my shop. It's heavily used, but it's not the most used. What features were you after, and what other models did you consider? The features that I was kind of after was mainly the capacity. I was trying to figure out what size belt that I want for an edge sander, because that kind of tells you what you can do with it. I was thinking, what was the most that I would probably use this for the most often? Probably, cleaning up the narrow faces on cutting boards or cabinet doors. So I pictured the largest cabinet door or cutting board that I would make. And then I wanted something a little bit bigger than that, because just to kind of future-proof it. And then something else that I really also wanted was the ability to use all of the belt without any obstructions. So that's where the dust collection pops up, and you can use something really long up against here and have that pass-through length. That's kind of the only features I was really, really after, because I never had a horizontal belt sander, so I really didn't know what to expect as far as how I would use it. You think you'd use it for a couple of things, and then once you get a machine, you realize all the other uses that you could possibly use it for. So really, I wasn't looking for a lot of very specific features. I believe that's all of the questions answered, either directly answering the questions or indirectly through the rest of the information in this video. Again, I'm making this Tool Talk series because, not necessarily for tool reviews, but mainly to help other people make an informed decision on whether they want to buy something or not. When I first started making woodworking videos, I was acquiring tools and purchasing stuff based upon a much smaller pool of information out there on the internet. So this series is something that I would have appreciated when I first started out in woodworking. Hopefully it's helpful to some of you out there. That's it for this video. If you want to stay up to date with everything that I publish, go to my website, jcustomcreations.com/newsletter, and sign up for my email newsletter so you don't miss anything that I publish. You guys take care. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you in the next video.